Lighting is one of the most fundamental tools in my 3D arsenal. Whether I'm making a realistic historical shot, a semi-stylized science fiction scene, or a stylized blockout, it's always the step that brings life into my shots. And in that process, there is one tool that I keep returning to, putting it into every single shot I make, no matter if I use cycles or Eevee. For me, it's basically become a super weapon of sorts, the gradients. Well, stay with me, I'll explain why. By the way, this technique is just one of the many workflows I teach in the Master Cinematic Storytelling in Blender course that I made for CG Boost. So if you want to really go into fundamentals like contrasts, colors, depth, composition, camera work, and sequencing shots, you'll find everything a 3D filmmaker needs there. And if you act fast, you'll be still able to grab it with a 20% discount active until the end of this month. These gradient planes seem simple. You just add a 2D plane and onto it make a new material, and then all it takes is to plug in this gradient texture into the alpha. To get rid of this noisiness, you can scroll down here to the settings menu of the shader and change the render method from dithered to blended. Congratulations! You have your first 2D gradient. This one you can also change to radial to make this sort of sphere in your scene, but for that, however, I recommend plugging it into the mapping and coordinate nodes to be able to then change the mapping of your gradient texture to object mode and play with the scale a bit to fill your plane. You can of course then change the color, and if you want the gradient extra bright, just plug it into the emission socket and increase its strength. And in the end, you can just scale it however you like and put it into your scene. Now let me show you how I use it. Gradients are an excellent lighting and composition tool. They don't really light your scene, but they are amazing for dividing some elements from the background. For example, here I have this hoplite waiting in front of a closed gate. I added a warm spotlight to highlight him from the side, however it's not enough, he's still somewhat blending with the background wall. All it takes, however, is to place a gradient colored to simulate the tint of the sun, and immediately the character stands out so much better. In fact, I frequently use these gradients, especially the radial gradients, to create simple light shafts that are really fast and easy to render. Sure, you can do this with volumetric lighting, but often I find these much easier to manage and I can place them wherever I want to, even if it's not really realistic. They're also amazing for simulating atmospheric haze. You just pick a few spots where your environment goes from midground to background, for example, and where, in best case scenario, is some sort of mountain range or something that divides the distance areas of your scenes. And then you just place the gradient plane there. Again, something that could be achieved in a number of ways, using volumetrics or compositing. However, the simplicity of these 2D planes is often so much more convenient for me. Finally, you can use these as a great sort of glow around objects. For example, in this recent video of mine, the trailer for my most recent release at CG Boost, I placed a few radial gradients in front of this spaceship engine to add glow to it. And then if you go to the compositing tab, add some bloom to the result, and crank up the emission of our gradients, they give you a very decent sci-fi glow. As mentioned, this was just part of my recently released course, Master Cinematic Storytelling in Blender. I really poured all my cinematic knowledge into this one. And yes, from now on, since I'm finished with the course, I will be making more tutorials for this channel again. And I'll even return to Heroes of Bronze. So definitely stay tuned, and until next time, stay creative my friends, Martin out.